Well, hello and welcome back to Rebecca for a celebration today. We are celebrating my 3-year anniversary on BookTube. It's very exciting to me, hopefully it's exciting to you all, but I posed out there that people could ask me any questions for a Q&A, and we are here to answer the hard questions today. So I got lots of questions about cats and books and reading and some random other stuff. So I think we'll start with the most important questions. Those are the ones about the cats. Erin read a book, asked, what are your cats called? I have 3 cats right now. My cats are Ripley, Rue, and Gumbo. Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads asked, where did you get your cats? And Bethan Bruninga Sokolar asked, who are they and how long have you had them? So those I have to kind of answer together by way of the story of my becoming a cat lady. So this was in 2017 is when I started to become a cat lady. I was leaving a friend's house in the evening in the city and happened to see a cat under a bush in the neighborhood when I was walking to my car. Walked over, thought, oh, well, it's probably feral. There's no way I will be able to catch this cat. But I am always that person who stops for a loose animal, you know. So I go over, and of course, she was completely docile and allowed me to pick her up, was quite happy and affectionate. I took her back to my friend's house because he had cats. Didn't realize at the time how weird it was that I was able to just carry this cat into the house with his cats and nobody reacted negatively. He didn't know who the cat was, so I took it home on my lap in the car, about a half-hour drive from the city, and then I got home and discovered Ripley, is what I named her, was in fact pregnant, a very young single mom. So she was about a month away from having her kittens. So I dealt with all of that. And as a first-time cat owner, I had really never been around cats at all in my life. I was a dog person. At the time I had two small dogs, Nutmeg and Cinnamon, who were both various types of Pomeranian mix. And so I was dealing with a pregnant cat and 2 dogs. She gave birth in my bathtub, and that was another whole ordeal, really. Going through dealing with kittens for the first time, having, again, never been exposed to cats. And one of those kittens was Rue, who is now one of my cats as well. So all of the other ones survived, thank goodness, and I was able to get them all shots and basic vet checkups and got them out to adopters that are people that I knew or work with, friends and neighbors, basically. And so I'm able to kind of catch up on how all of them are doing, which is very lovely. So Rue has 3 brothers and a sister as well, and all of them were little black and white tuxedos. So they're all wonderful and complete nutsos. So that was how I got those 2, Ripley, mama cat, and Rue, her son. And then I got very deeply into trap, neuter, return because I had experienced picking up a cat off the street and realized what a problem it was. And so I got into that, got involved with feral cat outreach. I had always wanted to, after that, start fostering cats as well, but my dogs were elderly at the time and I was kind of waiting till they were gone to do that. I also had some renovations to do on my house that now are really in progress in the main part, but I had my guest room that I had intended to use as the foster room eventually. And then 2020 happened, and guess what? I suddenly found myself at home full-time in the beginning of March. My company actually went to at home full-time a little bit before nationally that happened. But less than a week, I think it was 3 days actually after I went to full-time at home, so a shelter I had been following as one that I really thought was a great shelter and that I would like to foster for, had put out a call that they were trying to get every cat out of the shelter. And I was like, I'm at home, I can turn this space into what I can and begin fostering. So I started fostering, and at the time I had the idea that Rue, who is a very high energy cat, was maybe in need of a buddy, and the first cat I fostered affirmed that. However, that cat was super friendly, was immediately adopted. Everyone was shocked that I didn't foster fail immediately, which is what they refer to it as when you just adopt a cat you're fostering, it's foster failing. So I was happy to let him go and be adopted. He was actually adopted by someone from animal control because he had come in through animal control and quickly been snatched up by the shelter because he was very adoptable. that set me off to looking at the cats that were still at animal control, because our shelter had kind of tagged them for all of the cats that they thought would be readily adoptable, easy to get into a home. And there were only a few left behind that were less adoptable, were not very socialized. And almost immediately I latched on to what became my cat Gumbo. She was clearly very shy, and I think they even understated when I was talking to them about how shy she was. She is quite semi-feral. She's not totally angry or hostile to humans, but she is super afraid of humans. So I had the shelter pull her for me as a potential foster to adopt, and that wound up being what happened. So she was one of 3 cats who had been left there, and she had been there at animal control for, I think, over 6 months at that point. And so, which breaks my heart because she is such a sweet, sweet girl. Really was having a hard time there, clearly, but they were doing the best they could with her. So she spent about a month living under the bed before she finally started coming out, and has enjoyed cohabitating with us. She seems totally fine with the cohabitating. She has been very slow to warm up to human affection and being touched. I still don't pick her up, but Gumbo is a lovely little tiny Dilute Tortie. So it is the funniest dynamic because I kind of got a cat for Rue, who is a 16-pound giant monster of a boy. And Gumbo holds her own because she's so tiny and fast. She darts everywhere. If I had waited to name her, I would probably have named her Dart, in fact. So that's how I came to have these cats. So then Bethan Bruninga Sokolar asked what are their best quirks, and Melinda from A Web of Stories asked which of your cats is sassiest. And those go together because the best quirk for Mama Ripley is that she is the sassy mama. She was a very good mom. She was super loving and affectionate to her babies when they were born. The first week, she would not leave them to even go to the bathroom for over 24 hours at a time. She was right glued with them and stuck very protectively. But once they moved on, like a cat mom loses those mothering instincts pretty quick and just goes about their day, right? So after a couple months, she was done with being the bossy mom and she went on with her life. But she is very low energy. She doesn't like to tolerate anybody being nonsensy, and Rue and Gumbo are very nonsensy a lot. So she will chase after them and try to stop them sometimes from being wild. She's like, calm down, crazy kids. So she is that one, very bossy mama. Rue's best quirk is that he is about half dog. He loved the dogs. He was the troublemaker, for sure, as the kitten out of all of the group. He would climb me. He was the first one to make it up onto the bed, which horrified my dog, Nutmeg. She was not so sure about the kittens, but he thought he was a dog. He absolutely hung out with the 2 dogs I had all of the time. And when Nutmeg passed away in 2018, Cinnamon, my other dog, grieved quite a bit. And Rue was glued to his side through that whole time. And they really, really bonded. And so Rue very much thought he was Cinnamon's doggy bro. And they were just lovely together. So he's part dog for sure. And then Gumbo, I think her biggest quirk is that she is a tiny troll. She keeps up with Rue completely, and she's so tiny and innocent. She looks like she's a forever kitten because she's literally half his size at 7 pounds. But she will run up and try to start a fight with him, or she tries to start a chasey fight, which was more of a game. Like, she will try to get things going, playing, when he's just laid down and very calm. And she can hold her own with him. Then we've got a load of questions about books. So first up, we have Jess from Jess Book Girl TV. What book or author inspired you to start reading? That's a hard one because I don't really remember a lot of like the board books or children's books that I would have read. I grew up on definitely a lot of like Richard Scarry and Beatrix Potter and Eric Carle, that kind of stuff for sure. I think as far as chapter books, the one that is the main heavy hitter that I remember is The Chronicles of Narnia. That was such a big part of my childhood. I read that series over and over and over. I think the first time I read the full series start to finish, I was 6 years old. So it was probably a very early chapter book for me, or series of chapter books for me. That's So Poe, Shannon asked, what was your reading journey like, both getting into reading when you were younger and getting back into reading after your slump years? So I, as a kid, read anything I could get my hands on, basically. It was very integral in my life that I was read to, and I read everything. It was a very religious household, and reading the Bible or being read the Bible was a daily thing through the entirety of my memory. So that was very integral. I loved the library, but it wasn't super accessible. I wish I had had, the wonder of ebooks back then, because it was a good drive to get to the library and we weren't always able to go there. So I also was limited in what my selection was. So I was very kept under controls about what I could read. I also was homeschooled. So that meant that very often I was racing through my schoolwork within an hour or two, and then spending the rest of the day reading, at least until we got a computer. I was very into the computer once we had it. But I certainly was very bookish. I also had really bad insomnia. And funny enough, I think that is a very common thread across BookTube. I've run into quite a lot of people who have that, but where I would literally just be up for a couple of days and reading all night long. And that was normal, that was typical for me. And then crash out for like 18 hours, it was that sort of thing. So that was kind of my standard cycle almost, was just being up reading all night. And I had that love of books so ingrained in me. When I went to college, I loved the college library, and I discovered I could sneakily get books that I was not able to read before. And that was so exciting. I read the most ridiculous wide range of things, everything from Earthsea to Ulysses, like James Joyce Ulysses, all over the map. And I loved experimenting with that. I went through kind of a similar renaissance of my reading after I got out of college and I had access to the city library here. I had this massive library where the college libraries I was at before did not have very good selection. The city library had everything. And so I was like, again, I can read whatever I want. So I went on, deep dives into things like Stephen King, some romance-y stuff like chick lit, not quite genre romance. But I tried out a lot of things at that point. And then immediately after that, after getting out of college and getting into my career, I had that push and then I fell off. After maybe a year into my career, I just stopped reading altogether. I kind of lost sight of myself, of anything I enjoyed, my hobbies, altogether, and was just going for work success, really. I was so focused and so drained by that I lost reading for about 10 years. I read a couple of books over those 10 years, but it was hardly anything. There have been a couple books that I spent a year reading a single book, and I don't remember anything about the books, things like that. And so I think 2015, I started trying to build back up myself, my hobbies and enjoyment in things outside of work. And reading was the biggest aspect of that, and trying to rebuild those habits of how I was a voracious reader before. My first year, my focus was on one book per month and one graphic novel per month. And I barely squeaked by completing that. And that was an active, conscious effort to build that back into my routines and have reading be something I carved out time for. And I slowly got into things like e-reading and audiobooking. That took a little while because at that point I had always been a single book reader. I would just voraciously devour a single book and then move on to the next one. And I had to kind of move through what does it mean to be more of a mood reader, and have things on the go that are taking a little bit longer, and balancing back and forth between the things I want to read and the formats that I have. Making time to pick up ebooks and squeeze those in, working on audiobooks while I'm doing chores, and finding those ways of boosting the time that I'm reading really, really helped me to get back to where I am now. Erin Read a Book asked, what book or series got you into sci-fi? And also asked Star Wars or Star Trek as a separate question. So I kind of have to answer those together, I think, because I can't think of a single book series that really got me into sci-fi or was super inspiring. Maybe Choose Your Own Adventures, because those were often very sci-fi leaning. And me and my siblings would get those from the library anytime we saw one. So Choose Your Own Adventures maybe, but I think Star Trek has to be my answer for the question of Star Wars or Star Trek, because Star Trek is such a hopeful future. It's it was always that positive expression of science fiction that I loved. Whereas Star Wars has such a great world building aspect, and drama and epic scope, but Star Trek was just it was much more realism. It was believable that that was a future we could attain, and it was such a hopeful future. So I always loved that. And I think I was obsessed with, and we always watched whenever it was on, probably the first 3 different Star Trek series. So good. So good. I absolutely love that. The original Lost in Space, I think, was probably also a big one for me. Watched a lot of that sort of classic stuff. I wish I had grown up on Doctor Who. I did not discover that until I was an adult, but I love that kind of thing as well. Erin read a book, asked the same question, but about fantasy, and I have to say it was Chronicles of Narnia. Obviously, I already kind of answered that one, but that was definitely the core of my reading for fantasy that I had access to. I was not allowed to read a lot of fantasy for some odd reason. Fairy tales and folklore were allowed. I'm not sure why. So I read absolutely everything on the fairy tales and mythology shelves in the library, and some stuff that was weird. I've read all the actual Grimm stuff, which was probably out of my age range. It's pretty graphic. But most influential there, I think, was Andrew Lang's colored books of fairy tales. I read all of those and loved them, and have so many fond memories and so many unusual types of fairy tales that I've read before. I don't think I could, name all of the fairy tales, but I have such a collective consciousness of all these world fairy tales because of that experience of having read all those. Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads asked, have you ever been tempted to throw a book across the room? I have. Probably one of my most unpopular opinion responses to a book was Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. It's the second in the Strange the Dreamer duology, and Strange the Dreamer had a lot of great concepts, and I liked certain aspects, to continue on. Muse of Nightmares, I hated. I was so angry at that book. I just disliked almost everything about it, and had it not been a library book, I absolutely would have thrown it on the floor. It was very upsetting, and probably is my longest review on Goodreads I've ever written. So I will link that lengthy review down below if you would like to see my rant about it, but I'm fine with you enjoying the book. It was not for me, and it very much upset me. David Wardrop asked, do you ever judge a book by the cover? I absolutely do. I kind of go both directions in that I love really beautiful, shiny covers with high impact color. I tend toward UK covers over US covers because they do tend to be that more stylized, kind of iconic style of cover versus a direct literal interpretation of something from this story. But I also absolutely love cheesy kind of retro covers, or like 50s, 60s, 70s cheeseball covers. I love those. So I go kind of both directions in liking awful covers and really shiny covers. So I definitely do. But I also would not deny myself reading a book because it has a bad cover. I'm not going to avoid or think badly on the content of a book because of the cover. But I mean, you can see, I like pretty books. I've got my covers that I liked facing out. Yeah, I do love a pretty book. Melinda from A Web of Stories asked, what is one book that lives in your head rent-free? And that's a really tough question. I think I have to go with one that's very mixed, and that's why it sticks in my head, rather than being totally positive or totally negative. And that is The Monk of Mocha by Dave Eggers. It's a phenomenal book. Eggers is well known for his fiction, but this is nonfiction, and it's very lean narrative, recounting the efforts of this one guy to bring a very specific coffee methodology to the US. And that's a really compelling story, and the way it's told shows Eggers' craft. But I also really didn't like the guy. And I strongly disliked the fact that he very often was just patting himself on the back or unaware of the fact that a lot of things that were happening to him were luck. He really took credit for his success as being completely driven by himself, when it wasn't just him really that was causing this success. There was a lot of other things that went into it, and that was deeply frustrating. I really hate those sort of businessy memoirs where people do that, where they think they single-handedly, independently built their empire and deny everything around them that led to that. Just bothered me. So I think that's probably a good one for that. Then we have a rapid fire from Tiffany at Towering TBR. My favorite novel of all time is somewhere right here. Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. I feel like this is a basic answer. It's very popular, but I just have such an affinity for this. I have the religious background that this really taps into, and the sense of humor is very much my sense of humor. So I have to say this one for sure. Which living author would you like to have dinner with? Neil Gaiman. So he is just a lovely person. He has met so many of my other favorite authors and had relationships with them, like Ursula Le Guin, Terry Pratchett, Susanna Clarke, and he just is a fascinating person. He also is so empathetic and curious as a person that I totally feel like you could have a conversation with him easily and not be overly starstruck. He's pretty down to earth and talks with his fans genuinely. And I think that would be really, really awesome. Biggest book pet peeve. I don't have a lot of pet peeves as far as like the content of books. I will not swear off any trope in a book. I think they can all be done well or poorly, depending on how the author executes. There's not really a lot in terms of the formatting of books that I'm bothered by. So I would say maybe a trope that I tend to dislike is insta-love. I feel like nobody really likes that. Even teenagers are not fans anymore. So that might be one as tropes, but in the bookish space, I would say the thing that actually really gets to me is people reading books just to make fun of them, hate on them, rant about them. I really dislike that. I totally am fine with people disliking books and reviewing them negatively if they dislike the books, but specifically picking up a book just to be upset by it and annoyed with it and crap on somebody else's enjoyment of the book really puts me out. I just don't like that. What is your go-to comfort read? That's a really hard one because I don't reread very often. So I would have said Chronicles of Narnia, of course. Anne of Green Gables was a big one as a child. So those were probably childhood major comfort reads. Good Omens is one I have reread quite a bit in my adulthood. Probably Snuff. That would be actually a good one. I had the audiobook of Snuff from Discworld, and it's kind of a random book, but I had it on audio, and every time I would finish all my podcasts or whatever, I would just turn back on Snuff and re-listen to it. And so I re-listened to it a lot of times while I have it. And that book is so wonderful. It's very off the beaten path of Discworld. People don't think of that one as a major icon of the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. But that particular book is following Commander Vimes later on in his life as a parent, thinking about how he wants to raise his son. And he is the leader of the Guard, but this takes him away from the Guard. This is all about him going on vacation and trying to have a quiet vacation in the country and getting caught up in a mystery that's going on. And there are so many interesting aspects of this pulling him out of the city and showing the country life, the different class disparities that exist there, and certain prejudices. And so class and prejudice are major elements of that book. And so it has a lot to say, but it's also this really beautiful book. There's also a major side character who is an author in this book. And I love that aspect, of course, tying in kind of the bookish and the empathy that we gain from books within that story. So Snuff is probably a good one. Best narrative nonfiction you sped through. The Quants by Scott Patterson, How a New Breed of Math Whizzes Conquered Wall Street and Nearly Destroyed It. This is super compelling. I think everybody talks on this topic about The Big Short by Michael Lewis, and that is a very good book and a very good movie adaptation. But this is equally good and very compelling to read, and I never see anybody talk about it. So highly, highly like this one. That's So Poe asked, where do you find out about all the indie books you read? All over the place. I mean, some on BookTube. I follow the self-published fantasy blog Off, run by Mark Lawrence. I follow the self-published science fiction competition. Those have been great sources of a lot of the self-pubs that I read as well. Rob J. Hayes is a self-published author who has a blog/newsletter, and he opens up every month for submissions to anyone who has a book coming out to submit their book And so that has been a great source of what is new and coming out. I try to religiously follow whatever is being posted on there because every month he's got a good long list. A lot of those, because it's mostly fantasy, tend to be sequels. So I only have to look at about half of the list, but I get so many great ideas from there. Shannon also asked, what's an author you haven't talked about on your channel yet that you think everyone should give a try? That's really hard in terms of everyone. I'll give you a couple different options here. Number one is Hannah Shaw. This is Tiny But Mighty. She also has a children's fiction series called Adventures in Fosterland. And there's Hannah. She's very lovely, and she's also known as Kitten Lady. You can find her on YouTube under that name. She was so integral to my life when I first got a cat and having to care for young kittens, newborns in my house. And she has been such a resource for me. This is basically the Bible, a reference Bible for cats, and it's so fantastic. So this came massively in handy for me over my course of having kittens and fostering. I next will say It Starts With Food by Dallas and Melissa Hartwig. And this is yet another very practical reference. This does actually come at it from a simplistic view of how we eat, why we need certain foods, and how our body reacts biologically to those foods. It's just super well presented. It's super practical. It's super easy to understand. And it's also presented in such a way that you can read through and skip over the dense sciencey parts, but it does also include the dense sciencey parts too. And it's not super long. So this is geared toward a certain type of diet, but it's also really focused on flexibility and setting things up so that you can have long-term success with how you eat and understanding why your body needs certain things. So I found this incredibly practical and useful. And then Asru is getting on to his wheel, and then I'll give you a fiction one. This is In the Nightwood by Dale Bailey. I'm very remiss because I haven't actually read any other Dale Bailey books, but this is one of my all-time favorite stories, and it's very short. I think this is technically a novel in terms of word count, but it's quite quick. It's very impactful though. This is kind of a gothic Victorian manor house story set in contemporary times with a tie back to a Victorian author who lived there. And in this story, we are following a man and his wife. He's a scholar on that particular author and has gained an opportunity to go from America to this manor house in England to do some additional research because he's a specialist on this author. And they have a connection there, he and his wife. But they have also just recently lost their daughter. And so there is a very creepy, dark, fey wood aspect to this. That author was writing these dark fairy stories, and there's the question, was that real? Was that all contrived and inspired by this dark wood around the house? But underneath, in the subtext, it's very much about them processing the grief and loss that they're dealing with. And it's such a layered book, really, really phenomenal. Okay, I want to give you one more that's comics, and that is Atomic Robo. This is kind of a retro futurist comic series that follows a robot protagonist. It's certainly set in the past, but with this very sort of speculative futuristic science. And here you've got the flying she-devils. But what I love the most about this, beyond our main protagonist, the robot, I love the dynamic between Atomic Robo and Dr. Dinosaur, his nemesis. Dr. Dinosaur is so goofy and funny. He's ridiculous, but he thinks he's so much smarter than everyone else. It's really hilarious. And the dynamic between them is perfect. It's wonderful. So I've never seen anybody talk about that comic on BookTube, and absolutely so many people would love it. I think it's kind of all ages appropriate for the most part. So it's one many more people should be picking up. So I think that is it for book and cat questions. So on to the other stuff. Shannon from That's So Co asked, you make a lot of interesting recipes during your vlogs. Where do you get those? I think what I do in my vlogs is the opposite of recipes for the most part. And even when I am using recipes, I use them as a framework, much more so than following step by step. I'm not trying to make exactly that. As a person who primarily is cooking for one, I think anyone who lives alone knows the constant struggle of trying to beat things going bad in their fridge. And so that is me. I think staples I constantly have on hand that you see pop up in virtually everything I cook are things like mushroom, onion, and not cucumber, zucchini, Cucumber is very frequent, but zucchini, those three I always have. So they're constantly in my fridge and I'm constantly fighting to complete using them before they go bad. And so I'm always driving what I'm making based on what I have, and improvising. I think for like websites, I do have a couple that have been very reliable and I have continually followed over years. So those are My Heart Beats and Nom Nom Paleo. They're both really, really varied and really consistently high quality recipes and ideas for cooking. A newer one that I found last year is Rabbit and Wolves. That is a vegan comfort food recipe site. Really, really phenomenal. And they have great soups too, which I guess I was thinking about and looking around to see if I had any cookbooks, because I didn't think I had any. I do not have any cookbooks that I could find. I always love when recipes show up in books, like in Cozy Mysteries and stuff, but I almost never use them. I never reference cookbooks that I have on hand, so I just haven't kept them around. But the last one I did have was Deborah Madison's vegetable soups, which is very on brand for me. I love vegetable soups, but I gave it away. So I don't have that one anymore, but it is a very reliable and fantastic cookbook if you're looking for something like that. I think otherwise, in terms of recipe resources that I use, I just look online very often, and if I am looking for a recipe, usually I will try seeing if Jamie Oliver has a recipe out there for something first, because he, as a chef, he's a very famous professional chef, like TV personality chef, and he leans toward really simplifying recipes, and he also tries to, or he does not adhere to the traditional way of making a thing. He tries to make it simple, he tries to make it very fresh, and he often tries to make it light, so it's not a very heavy recipe. So there's not a lot of waste involved in his recipes where you're having to buy a big amount of thing and then just use a tiny bit of it, that sort of thing. It's great when I can use one of his recipes because of that leaning. It definitely aligns with my priorities when I'm cooking. So I'm often just throwing things together, though, realistically. Yeah, so very intuitive. And next, Shannon also asked, you also have such a fun sweatshirt t-shirt collection. Where did you get those? All over the place. I mean, in general, I do keep up on things like local shelters. Local animal shelters will have promotional things. I think a couple of those have come from limited time Pride offers with the shelters where they did a bonfire campaign. Bonfire is a short-term thing where you make a shirt and everybody pays for their shirt and then they print them all out. That sort of thing. So I follow a lot of shelters and get them that way. I follow a lot of vendor fairs locally. So those are not really things I can specifically send you to, but places I can specifically send you to. So this shirt, Read Books, Be Kind and Stay Weird, is from Hello Lovely, which is a romance book box. And I learned about that because of BookTube, but I've never gotten their boxes. They just sell merch as well. Self-Care is for Everyone, Inkwell Threads, Becky Clothing, ModCloth. I have a lot of stuff from ModCloth. Boardwalk, Sugar and Sloth, and the Chop Shop Store. So Chop Shop Store is kind of a weird one because I would never have heard of them, but they actually are the merch for the Planetary Society. So Planetary Society is the largest nonprofit space advocacy group. Bill Nye, the science guy, is their CEO currently and has been for years. I'm a member of that. So if you're a member, occasionally you will get sent these discount notifications for the Chop Shop Store. So that's how I know of them. And I think that's it. I mean, otherwise normal stores, I probably would turn to Target or Kohl's as my main source of graphic tees. Sue Jackson asked, are you a scientist or engineer or just a science fan? Just a science fan, sort of. I am in a STEM career and my job title does include engineer. I do not have a good science background. I think if I did have a good science background and had not, so I was homeschooled and I really didn't have any science training. The fundamentals are just completely not there for me, basically. When I went to college, I took botany and geology as my sciences, as well as computer science. And that was it. I avoided all of the major sciences. But I do like them. I really enjoy and engage with science so much. And so that's all kind of self-learned through reading. And then my job title includes engineer, and Towering TBR asked, what type of work do you do and is it related to your first ever job? So playing off of that, I work in STEM. I have a degree in information systems, and my job is a very narrow niche in the financial markets, data, technologies. So I kind of am like a firefighter, but for technological problems. So the engineer part of my job is really reverse engineering. Very often I am being thrown into a position where something major has happened and I have to figure out what that is, why it happened, and how quickly can we get out of that bad situation. And very often it's things I have never seen before. Almost every time. It's something I've never seen before, or something I am having to relate to something I've seen before, but it's not quite that. So that's very much my job. My first job was not at all like that. My first job was actually a janitor at an auto shop, because my dad runs an auto shop. And it was before he had the auto shop himself, when he was working for someone else, but that was my in. And then Melinda from Web of Stories asked, what was your favorite subject in school? Which I would say all of them. I loved school. I probably should have been an academic, but I felt like I had to finish school in the allotted amount of time and graduate from college and go off into a career. And I just loved college. I was homeschooled. I hated homeschooling, absolutely loathed it. I tested into college early, so I started community college when I was 15, because there's specifically a program in the state that I grew up in to do that, for dual credit. And so I went to college and got my associate's degree from community college, which is a 2-year degree for your general education requirements. And then I transferred when I was 17 to university and got my bachelor's in science and got an information systems degree there. But through the entire time, I loaded up. Every semester I took as many classes as I could, because I loved it. I loved everything about college. I took so many random stuff. I never at any point was following a literature degree, but I went into the honors literature program. I had to specifically write an essay to get in. I took advanced business statistics as an elective because I wanted to. The teacher had a great reputation. I had to test into that course because it was outside of my area. So I went above and beyond to do all sort of weird things, and I enjoyed them so very much. I just loved everything about college. It was so great for me. Yeah, so I didn't answer your question at all. I took art history. That was a really great one because it was so fun. You had to go to the library to check out the slides, to look at the slides of the art, and that was like a whole communal experience taking that class, because you had to kind of have a study group because only so many people could check out the slides at once. It was, yeah, so many great memories of college, really. Erin Read a Book asked another couple of questions. What state do you live in? I live in Missouri, in the very middle of the US. And have you lived anywhere else? So I was born in California and spent the first couple years of my life there, and then moved to Washington State, far on the West Coast, and love the West Coast, both California and Washington, and had never been anywhere else. And literally, to go to college, I had never visited my college, but I packed up and went to Missouri when I was coming here for college. And that was my first time on a plane, my first time really traveling anywhere at all. And I came here and stayed. Kristen L. SFF Reader asked, do you have any other hobbies besides books and fostering pets? So those are the big ones for sure. I think around 2017, 2018, I found that I had bad knees. And before that, I had a lot of really physical hobbies. I did CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting and running. And then I had to really shift. And I'm still finding my footing there with what I like and what I keep up. But books are the main thing I keep up. I'm a big video gamer. I'm a big board gamer. I'm a big tabletop gamer. I've been with the same tabletop gaming group since I think 2012, and we're currently doing a Pathfinder campaign that's kind of a horror-y sort of thing with lots of vampires and stuff. So that is really fun. I love microbrew and brew pubs, and so I go to a lot of events. I'm very lucky to be in kind of one of the capitals of brewing in the US, and so we have lots of great microbreweries and brew pubs here, and many events surrounding that, so I go to a lot of those. I also crochet. We're on hiatus right now, but I have been part of a social justice movie night group. So those are all my good, chill, mellow hobbies, I think now. Are you more of a city or country person? That's also from Kristen. And I am definitely a city person. I, in theory, like the idea of being isolated in a cabin in the woods sort of deal, away from all the people. Because I do at times think people are awful, but I really like the city. I love being near everything, being accessible to everything, and having a lot going on where I am. And I just love that. So I definitely am city. I could not foresee living rurally anymore. John from Hey Y'all Listen Up asked, what's your dream car if you have one? And this is probably not the answer you want, but my dream car is to not have a car. I wish I lived somewhere that had better public transit, because we do not have good public transit here, and there's just no way to get by without a car for me. It's a real hassle, and I feel terrible for people who do not have cars here. So I wish everywhere had public transit. That's my dream. But I do like a weird microcar. That's probably what I like. So I think I would go with, there is this quirky antique car called a Go-Go Mobile. And I think I can't remember, it's somewhere maybe Eastern European, but they are so funky looking. They're very adorable and cute and tiny, and I love them. I do like antique cars, so I think I mentioned earlier, my dad runs an auto shop, so I have been exposed to that. He was never really into like car collecting or anything, but I have been to car shows and that kind of stuff throughout my life, so I've seen a lot of the really cool cars. And my uncle, who worked in the auto shop with my dad, who also is a welder and muffler guy, he has gotten into restoring old cars recently, like not recently, like within the last 10 years. That's recently for me. He has more gotten into that, and so I really like the old cars that he has restored. They're very lovely. I have an appreciation for them, but I don't think I would want the upkeep of an old car. So it's my dream car if it were perfect and I never had to do anything to upkeep it. Really. And then we have a smattering of questions from Tiffany at Towering TBR. What is my favorite Studio Ghibli movie? Spirited Away. Absolutely, hands down. Like, that one blows everything out of the water that I have seen of the Ghibli movies. Favorite podcast. So unsurprisingly, I like the Fast Fact type podcast. So I will say Allie Ward's Ologies podcast is fantastic. She interviews a different ologist, which is a specialist in some field, in a niche, every single episode, and they are delightful. They are so passionate every time. And Allie Ward, I don't think she is a scientist herself, but she's a science communicator. If you want to see more from her, she has a Netflix show, 100 Humans, that also is very sciencey, that I highly recommend. And then the other one I would say is No Such Thing as a Fish podcast. So good. It has 4 people on it usually, and the 4 main people that are staples are from QI, British Quiz Show, but they are not on QI. They are the researchers behind QI. And so this podcast is them. Every week, each one of them brings a fact that they encountered that week, and then they all kind of bounce off of that fact with different similar topical anecdotes and information, really. And it's just great fun. Do you have any allergies? No, I don't have any allergies. I'm lactose intolerant, but just about everybody is. Where's the coolest place you've traveled? I've gone to lots of really cool places, so that's really hard. I think probably, well, Dublin is my favorite city that I've been to, but I think Kauai, just the whole island, like I could live there. I just about was ready to at the end of my vacation there. I was like, can I just quit my job and stay and not go back? Then favorite dessert or candy? It's a tough one because I'm much more savory. I do not have a sweet tooth. Give me cheese any day. I would go with mochi probably, because mochi is a wonderful Japanese dessert that's either filled with ice cream or sweet bean paste, and it's got kind of a gelatinous, like a gummy outside, and it's delicious. I think, go with matcha or black sesame flavor as my favorites. It's a weird thing if you haven't ever seen mochi. So that is it for the question. Thank you all very much for the questions, and even more, thank you, even if you didn't ask a question, for being here, sticking with me for 3 years, keeping me here for 3 years. I never expected I would stick around at this for 3 years. This was kind of a lark that I took up during the pandemic, and here I am, still here 3 years later. So it is all because of you. Thank you so very much for watching.